Okay, so I'm getting the signal from it that Lingers might be a little bit late, or maybe he won't make today's call. I'll kind of verify that with Mav a little bit, but we'll go ahead and get started here in just a minute or so. For everyone else kind of listening in, if you can just do a double check and make certain your mic's on mute, just because we're going to record the call. After the recording, we'll have an unrecorded part if you want to be a little bit more free form, but I'll make certain there's plenty of time to ask questions there. But we'll start off with our special guest. So, welcome everybody to today's community call this week. You have me, Ken, for the second time in a row. We're kind of tag teaming here a little bit with Jasper, but he was unable to make this week. But I'm really excited because we have our special guest here, which is not really anybody unnew to the community, but we're joined today by both Wander and Nick from Nodeset. Wander, good to have you on board here.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate you guys having us. It's always great to chat with the Rocket Pool community. We old school part of this community. Nick and I have been here for many years, so it's always nice to chat with everybody here.
Yeah,
and
thanks
Nick,
for having me.
welcome. Good evening to you.
Thanks.
Good evening to you too, sir.
It's always great to kind of start out with a known group here, but for those that don't know what Nodeset is, maybe they've been living under a rock, would one of you take just a few moments and kind of describe a little bit about what Nodeset is?
Yeah, sure, happy to. So as Mike mentioned, or Wander mentioned, excuse me, we come from the early Rocket Pool community, and we've sort of seen Rocket Pool grow over the last couple of years and have seen some of the challenges associated with scaling a permissionless protocol. And about a year and a half ago, we came together to try and think through some ideas as to how we could help Rocket Pool scale. And then on top of that, we also really wanted to focus on empowering independent and small and medium business node operators in the industry. I think a lot of us have seen over the last year and a half, a number of forces that are maybe squeezing independent operators, squeezing solo stakers, and we really want to try and build products, protocols, and partnerships that target the independent operators and in making sure that they can survive and thrive in the future of Ethereum staking and sort of decentralized compute more generally. And to that end, our main focus is obviously building Constellation, and that is the scaling protocol on top of Rocket Pool that will allow us to distribute the operator bond essentially across as many operators as possible on top of Rocket Pool. And we think that it'll have tremendous benefits when it comes to growing Rocket Pool in the face of some of these competitors.
Yeah, could you take a little bit of time and just explain a little bit about the concepts of Constellation?
Yeah, sure. So the idea is that we really want to ingest as many existing node operators across the Rocket Pool ecosystem as possible, bring them into Constellation, put them through a relatively light Sybil resistance process. We are going to look at your history of performance. We'd like to see at least 6 months of performance. We'll be looking at the sort of average effectiveness over the last 3 months to make sure we're hitting some minimal standards. And then, of course, we'll put you through a really high-level sort of interview just to ensure that you are who you say you are. And that allows us to offer our benefits to as many existing operators as possible. From there, we really want to build some liquid staking token products, XRETH and XRPL, that attracts depositors who would want to take advantage of those products and essentially fund the operator bond. From there, we distribute these assets in a very egalitarian fashion across all of the operators in the community. And the focus here is egalitarian, right? We really want to support the long tail of operators as much as possible. And we want to make sure that the general, I guess you could say, average exposure per operator, the net exposure per operator from a financial standpoint to the protocol is minimized. So, when you have, let's say, 5 validators being distributed equally across every single operator in the protocol, that disproportionately benefits the small scale staker who's running 1 validator, 2 validators, 3 validators, versus the larger operator who's running 50 or 100. And we really want to make sure that this benefits the small guy relative to the larger guy. So
we are smaller guys. That's what we came from. So we want to make sure that everybody has that opportunity. And I think the only other thing I want to mention here too, Nick, if you let me interrupt for a second,
yeah, of course,
is that during this Sybil process, we don't collect personally identifiable information. We don't want that. We don't want your personally identifiable information. We want to make sure that you're a real person that can run a node, but we don't want to compromise your personal security or have you concerned about that at all. So that's really important to us. It's tough. It's not an easy thing to do to Sybil protect a set of node operators in an anonymous setting. There's a lot of people that can take advantage of anonymity to do some really terrible things, and we want to try to do the very best we can to prevent those terrible things while also preventing anyone from having to disclose their personal information.
Yeah, and speaking a little bit more to that, we are excited about some of the future Zkey ID solutions coming to market. They're relatively immature at this point, but we are very excited about where that's going, and we think that there's a lot of potential there to further improve, operator PII security.
Yeah.
Sorry, again, I interrupted you.
No, it was just going to kind of lead to my next question, which is as I'm kind of tracking and following here, it sounds like you're still very much in an active recruitment phase where you're looking for more node operators. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And if one of the Rocket Pool node operators is listening now and they haven't inquired about the opportunity to join Nodeset, how does one do that?
Absolutely. So at this point, we have about 350 applicants. I've personally spoken to about 200 of those applicants and have onboarded them. We are very biased towards onboarding operators, if at all possible, right? So unlike, let's say, the Lido node operator committee, that committee is heavily incentivized to minimize new entrants in order to protect market share of each independent operator in their system. We are incentivized to onboard as many quality operators as possible, since we sort of manage risk by distributing assets across more operators versus fewer. So we're always enthused to have more willing participants, and the easiest way to do that is to simply go to our website, nodeset.io. There's a form you can fill out there, and we will basically ingest your application. We will run it through our process, and then you should receive an email, either admitting you, rejecting you for a specific reason, and giving you some tips on how you can improve yourself if it's something around performance, or maybe you submitted an invalid signature. This is the right format, etc. We want to get you through that initial application process as painlessly as possible, and then you'll have a conversation with myself or someone else on the team just to go through some high-level questions about you and your node. Obviously, I've had hundreds of these at this point, and many people in the community can speak to that process if you desire to ask them. It's really meant to simply verify that you are who you say you are. This is not some kind of grueling 30-40 minute process.
Excellent. And I see Wander is posted in the chat channel, I guess if I could say that, is the URL, which is nodeset.io/join for those that are just listening to this on audio. So I wonder if you could maybe break down a little bit more Constellation, right? So I get in concept that it allows, I guess, individuals that either have ETH or RPL, they could, once you're launched, they could invest that into Nodeset and get a Nodeset version of a liquid staking token, right? And it has certain benefits in terms of the commission rate or the ability to earn rewards on RPL. There's a whitelisted or verified set of node operators that you then distribute that to use as the node operator deposit. And those node operators will receive some fraction of a commission based upon, I guess, their reputation. They get the eligibility to participate in Nodeset, but then they receive part of an ETH commission. But can you kind of walk us through these a little bit more and maybe explain some of the roles and responsibilities of each, and kind of what what maybe the benefit or the selling point is to each of those groups, the ETH and RPL depositors, the node operators, and then the administrators in Constellation?
Yeah, I can take this one if you want, Nick.
Sure. Yeah.
So, first thing I know about Constellation in general is that there's three different roles of people that participate in the system. So there's the depositors, there's the node operators, and then there's the administrators. So a depositor is going to be, anyone who, just like with our ETH right now, deposits into the system. The only difference with Constellation is that instead of it just being XRETH, which is sort of our version of rETH, there's also XRPL. So the idea is that, on the staking side of the equation for Rocket Pool, or I should say the node operator side of the equation, you need RPL and you need Ether, right? So, for various reasons, not everybody has those, or they've tapped out or whatever. So in order to grow the system, we need more liquid assets and we need to give those to people who can run nodes. So the depositors are going to be people who have assets and don't want to run nodes. Now, why would you want to run, or why would you want to deposit into Constellation rather than Rocket Pool at the base layer? So for XRPL, pretty straightforward question. You can't get any yield from your RPL unless you stake it, and you can't stake it unless you run a node. If you have too much RPL because you're just too bullish on Rocket Pool and you don't have enough Ether to support that to stake it, then XRPL makes a lot of sense. You put it in there, and then we can help use that to make nodes. When it comes to XRETH, the value proposition is a little bit more interesting. It's a kind of a new staking product. Basically, it's something that is intentionally higher yield. So because it takes the node operator side of the equation, we're actually able to provide more yield than the average liquid staking token. So there's actually no commission on XRETH whatsoever, which is a pretty huge benefit to anyone who deposits into the system. The downside to that, though, is that you do, unlike rETH, you have a little bit of slashing exposure because you are providing the node operator side of the equation. So that's, when Nick mentioned risk management through this large set of node operators, that's one of the huge reasons why we want as many people as possible to join the system. I mean, obviously for ideological reasons, for the ethos of what we're building, where we came from, who we are, all that kind of stuff. We do love independent node operators, and we've always wanted to build something that supported them. But part of the risk management of the system and making sure that XRETH holders have as little risk as possible for slashing, while retaining a completely different product than rETH, right? We don't want to cannibalize rETH. The goal is to get as many node operators on board as possible. So that's the sort of the overview of the first set of user roles as depositors. People who deposit Ether get XRETH in return, or people who deposit RPL and get XRPL in return. So as you mentioned, essentially what happens is non-custodially Constellation, it's a group of smart contracts. It funnels all of the assets that are put into these smart contracts out towards node operators. So node operators pay gas to create nodes, and they will have the assets sent from them from the depositors to the nodes that are created. So a node operator can join, they can make as many validators as they are allowed to make. Everybody will have an equal amount that they're allowed to make, and I'll get to this in a second, but the limit for that will be raised slowly over time to make sure that the system is working as intended. But everyone will have an equal amount, so there's not going to be like this will not be a system like Lido where you have privileged 30 something node operators or whatever with thousands of validators a piece or whatever, and your CSM, which has like a tiny sliver of your TVL. Instead, this is it's very different. We will be distributing assets. Well, not we, but the Constellation smart contracts will distribute them completely permissionlessly and do it totally in a totally egalitarian manner. So if you're a node operator on Nodeset, then you run nodes for Constellation, and you get paid a little bit of money or a little bit of Ether for each one of the nodes or validators that you run. So, basically everyone wins under the system, which is really nice. Depositors get a completely different kind of product that has enhanced yield. If due to the way that Rocket Pool works, any amount of XRETH that is minted because of LEBs are actually, it's multiplied by 3x that amount on the amount of rETH capacity that is generated. So, it's great for Rocket Pool, the underlying protocol, which is at the moment limited by the number of node operators in the system. So and then on the node operator side of things for us, you can get basically paid extra ether to continue running the same infrastructure you've already been running. The difference is that you're now doing it for people across the world automatically who want your services, and we're connecting you to them and giving you that extra, some of the benefit of that, right? So those are the first two roles, right, in Constellation. The third one, I think, this has been a little bit of a subject of sort of some misinformation. I think because people don't really understand the system, which is fair. We haven't released the code yet. We're still putting the final touches on it. We do require Houston to be launched in order for us to do that. So we're still waiting to make the code public after we do our audits, which will happen after Houston releases. But we can come back to schedule in a little bit. But the admin, for the most part, it does, it doesn't actually touch assets. It doesn't control really anything deeply. What it does is it sort of makes sure that the protocol continues to run as expected. So it sets parameters, can whitelist node operator addresses, eject operators if they do something bad, like, well, I can't really think of anything horrible that they would do. Maybe they would like intentionally have bad performance or something like that. So if you did, then you'd get ejected. And it also has the ability to propose upgrades. Now the upgrade proposals they're not unilateral. It takes a long time for those to actually go into place. The upgrade mechanism that we currently have in there, which we may make even more decentralized, is that the admin can propose an update, and it takes a long, like basically there's a setting when the protocol is deployed for how long it will take until the contract upgrades go through. So it could be something like months, right? So if you didn't like an upgrade for whatever reason, then you could leave before it affected you. But again, we're considering some ways to add even more safeguards to that, just so that people feel a little bit more secure about that. Unfortunately, we can't remove the ability to have protocol upgrades simply because Rocket Pool itself is not ossified. We are hoping to do that one day, but that does require Rocket Pool to make some promises about not changing in certain ways. So for now, we have to leave it as is. But as part of the duties that the admin does, there's the reasons that the admin does this is because they get a little bit of the cut of fees from the system. And until 7002, EIP 7002 is on mainnet, for safety's sake, the admin should, but is not necessarily required by the smart contracts to hold pre-signed exit messages. So that's just a safety mechanism that we have in there. It's not, obviously node operators will always retain their keys to the validators that they run. So that is always going to be the case. There's no way that anyone else would ever be able to control any of that. It's all non-custodial. So if there's ever anything wrong, then the node operators are probably the first one that we would contact them and be like, "Yo, can you fix your node?" And ultimately, we have like sort of this cascading layers of safety for the smart contracts, and the admin is sort of part of that. So those are the three main roles for Constellation and how it works. I didn't really describe a lot of the details. It's quite complicated, but we'll be releasing the contract code at some point. Everybody can go through it and the fine-tooth comb and whatnot.
Well, excellent. Thank you very much for that kind of detailed explanation. And it is interesting on a high level how it does solve the kind of problem that Rocket Pool has right now, which is, I might phrase it as, we probably have a sufficiently large set of node operators. What we lack is a sufficiently large set of capital to fund those node operators to spin up mini pools or validators. And so I really do see Nodeset playing a very key role in an ability to collect that collateral from individuals that want to get a staking product, maybe a little bit more competitive staking product with no commission fee that could then be distributed to those node operators, right? So it looks like a win-win-win, if you will, out of
Yeah,
that
I can't think of anyone who's really harmed by this. We thought hard. This is something that when Nick and I sat down, we met each other in person for the first time at HodlerCon in Hawaii, actually, and we sat down for a long time. We'd been talking about this concept, the idea behind this stuff for even about 6 months before this. But I still remember we sat down for several hours and discussed different architectures and all sorts of different things. We kept rejecting things, saying like, no, this is bad for this party, or no, this is bad for this party, or whatever. But at the end of the day, it took a long time for us to actually research and find something that was going to work for everybody, and it was going to be positive for everyone. It's very hard to do. It cost us a lot of money to build this, and we did want to do it correctly, though. We could have cut some corners along the way. We could have made it custodial, for example, and we had some pressure from people who really wanted to deposit into the system and get XRETH. They said they didn't care. We were like, okay, we'll just make it custodial. It'll be fine. And we kind of refused. We said no, it needs to be done correctly. It's not right to make a product that's not good for everybody who's a participant in it. And everyone needs to have the safety guarantees that they would expect from Rocket Pool. So if we're going to be building on top of Rocket Pool, we want the same safety guarantees that the underlying core contracts have. That's just a non-negotiable thing.
Yeah, well, I certainly want to invite folks to either come up here on stage or post in the chat channel here, and any questions they might have. I've got one to just start off, and I see Danilo is typing as I speak here. But the first one is, and maybe Wander, you alluded to it a little bit, is how will the distribution of validators go? Is it just going to be kind of a round robin? Anybody that's a registered Nodeset operator would get one, and then once everybody has one, it would just do a round robin to give the second one? Or could you talk a little bit about how the distribution process works?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. I mean, this gets into the stuff that I love talking about, which is like exactly how these contracts work and the logic behind things. So we actually don't do a round robin, and the reason was we originally in the original proof of concept, the history behind this is that a couple of years ago I wrote a proof of concept in Solidity, and it was nowhere close to being production code, but it was something just to sort of get us started and try and figure out what are the problems that we're going to encounter during development here. So one of the things that we found during that time was that the round robin methodology is actually quite bad, because if somebody doesn't make a validator like they're supposed to, then the entire system just kind of waits on them. Now, theoretically, you could have it so that everybody creates one and you just wait for everybody to create one before you increment it. But the problem is that now the protocol won't be able to grow very quickly, if at all, really, because you'd have to kick people out if they weren't creating validators within a certain amount of time. And then, what happens during high gas prices? Is that okay? We also considered, helping people pay for gas costs and things like that. But there's quite a number of different exploits that kind of come out of that. So the way that the system works today is actually a little bit more straightforward and simple, which, at the end of the day, if you know anything about smart contract development, you'll know that, the simple way is usually the best. So the way that it works today is that essentially we just set a limit. We say, okay, everybody can create up to X amount of validators. So we'll start it off when we launch the protocol at 1. And that means that everybody can create one validator, right? Now, if somebody joins the system and they don't create that validator, then they won't get paid as much, right? So you are paid according to the amount of validators that you run. And it's not a linear one-to-one currently. We may decide to sort of soften that curve or change it depending on what the incentives look like, or how many people are running however much, right, during periods of high gas prices. But if you're a node operator and you decide not to create another validator when you have the opportunity to do so. So let's say we raise it from 1 to 2, and now some, maybe 50% of people in the network have 1, and then 50% of the people in the network have 2. The people who get who have 2 validators that they're running will get paid 100% of the amount that they're supposed to get paid. But the people who have just 1 validator actually have less than 50% that they're getting paid. And the idea is to incentivize you to always be creating new validators and grow the system. You will, like I said, we may soften this curve a little bit depending on how incentives work, right? And we understand that high gas prices may get people to kind of be hesitating a little bit. No one's ever really going to be punished from it. You're not having money taken away, but you just sort of opportunity cost, basically. So this is one of those things that's, seems kind of simple at first glance. Is like, we'll just raise the limit. Okay, so it goes from 2 to 3, 3 to 4, right, for every person. So if we have hundreds of node operators, then you're adding hundreds of validators of capacity every time you do that. And then, of course, if we get a lot of assets, maybe we'll go from 5 to 10 or 10 to 15 or whatever. But we do want to grow, in a flat way, right? So if we're seeing a very lumpy distribution, certain people are willing to pay high gas prices in order to get, as many validators as possible, and other people are not, then we may soften the incentives curve a little bit and say, okay, well, maybe it makes sense for you to get paid, more linearly based on the number of validators that you have. But the goal ultimately is to incentivize everyone to always be participating in the system and making more validators because, theoretically, if things go really well, it should be growing pretty much constantly or at least staying at a steady state. If there's slight dips in TVL, then we do reserve a bit of liquidity to kind of absorb those hits. And if absolutely necessary, that's at the end of the day, if there's some sort of like major DPEG event or something, then, we could broadcast these pre-assigned exit messages that everyone will provide us. But that is, probably not really going to be used very lightly or at all, hopefully. And ideally, it's a temporary measure just until 7002 comes, and then we'll just have those, that kind of call in the contract instead. So that's the mechanism that we use currently.
There's a lot of discussion we had around the automatic sort of an automated version of this, and it was just extremely gameable and attackable at early stages of growth. We wanted to make sure that the initial months after launch were rock solid from a security standpoint, and it requires a little bit more hands-on management from us when it comes to tweaking that target validator count, but it also ensures that we're not seeing any kind of malicious behavior when it comes to someone putting in a massive deposit, trying to get assets distributed, and also trying to request withdrawals, stuff like that. So we think this is the happy medium for the initial release, and then with forced exits and a larger TVL base, that allows for potentially a more automated system to be put in place.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Well, we've got about maybe a half dozen questions already in the chat channel here. Danny Lowe asked the first question. He says, any plans for infrastructure, for instance, a separate instance of the rescue node, so that way Nodeset operators won't have a lower effective rates during maintenance?
That's a good question. So we currently don't have any plans, mostly because we're focusing so deeply on just trying to get Constellation ready, right? It's taking up the vast majority of our time, just to try and get it out the door as quickly as possible. However, we're very much aware of the idea that node operators in the system need to be supported and not just sort of left on their own. So this isn't necessarily just with stuff like another instance of the rescue node, which I'm sure Patches would be very happy to help us out with that. But it also includes things like deep documentation, right? There's a you can't you can't necessarily just put something out there and expect people to know how to use it, right? So we also are going to make sure that we spend a lot of time on that, and we're working really hard. We have done some work to take the incredible smart node base that's already there and alter it slightly, because the user interface for the smart node is fantastic, right? It's one of the best in the ecosystem. So we felt like that was really important to make sure that the node operator experience was really high quality. If you don't have these kinds of infrastructure in place, then people will not necessarily want to use it. So this is something we care about a lot. And I mean, I think that's a great suggestion. And so what I'm gonna ask in return, Danilo, is if will you ping Patches and beg him for this?
Jasper has a couple of questions here. Why don't you ask a couple of just open-ended ones? For instance, the first one is, do you think there's any misconceptions about Nodeset, maybe beyond the role of the administrator you mentioned? And I like his third question, which is, what are your hopes for the first week of launch? What would that look like? I know we haven't talked about timing. We'll get there in a little bit.
Yes, there's a lot of misconceptions I think out there about Nodeset. I think it's mostly because we haven't, you know, there's we say stuff, right, and not everybody hears it, right. There's, you know, if you weren't at the Denver liftoff, maybe you didn't hear us speak there. You know, we are part of the community. We talk a lot, and people hopefully at this point know who we are and what we're about. But I think if you hear the idea of, oh, there's a permissioned layer on top of Rocket Pool, then you like immediately kind of freak out and you're like, oh, Lido on top of Rocket Pool? That sounds horrible, right? But you know, that's not exactly what we're doing at all, right? There's I won't say that there's zero comparisons you can make to Lido, right? Like obviously Lido does permission their node operators and we do the same thing, but I think that's really where the comparison stops. You know, we're doing it in a totally different way. You know, our incentive is to bring on as many people as possible, whereas Lido's is not. We touched on that before, but there's also, I think, some misunderstandings of what the admin role does. I think I've seen a couple of people allude to the idea that the admin has like total control over the protocol, which is just kind of laughable. It definitely does not. You know, if we had total control over the protocol, you know, let me put it this way. We've gone through a lot of effort to make sure that we didn't have the admin have a lot of control over the protocol. And it would have been a lot of wasted effort if we if we didn't do that. If it was just gonna,
I think that in general, whenever it comes to, you know, Constellation or any other work we may do, the path to ossification and the maximization of autonomy is where we want to move. I want to have as little managerial control over these systems as possible in the long run, and the more we can automate or, you know, push off to other parties, whatever, is really where we want to be. So, yeah.
All right. Our next question comes from Rocknet, who asks, what are your thoughts about an unbalanced deposit situation where you don't have enough of one of the two asset types, either ETH or RPL in the XRETH or XRPL model? Would you just wait for equilibrium, or is there some plan in place to manage that?
It would be a combined approach. To a certain extent, you want to let the market do what it wants to do, right? You don't want to be too aggressive when it comes to, and maybe perhaps wasteful when it comes to using funds for incentive purposes. So you don't want to be jerking the market around week to week, maybe even month to month. But, you know, we will presumably have revenues being thrown off the system, which we can direct towards, you know, very liquidity pools or direct incentives to operators or whatever it may be that's required. And that'll come in the form of, you know, the ETH commissions as well as some RPL commissions from emissions of the protocol. And, you know, we're also happy to work with and collaborate with folks when it comes to thinking about ways to direct those rewards. In a really crazy situation, for example, if, you know, XRETH demand was through the roof and we consumed all of the rETH demand and there was no more rETH demand, then we would want to, you know, incentivize rETH demand, right? That would make sense. And there's some creative ways we can do that. And, you know, we also, you know, intend to have a decentralized front end. So we'll be working with partners to surface XRETH. And there are creative things you can do when it comes to, you know, creating cool LP position type tokens with a mixture of both XRETH and rETH. So,
or even XRPL too.
Yeah, an XRPL. So there's a lot of cool stuff that can be done. We'll be probably exploring those closer to launch and maybe discussing those more publicly. But for now, that's really all I can say.
Yeah. I realized, Ken, I'm sorry, I forgot to answer Jasper's third question of, I already did answer his second question. Are there plans to incorporate forced exits in the future? You know, obviously, yes, I touched on that a little bit earlier, but as for the third question there, I think it's a fun question, and I appreciate people asking fun questions. This is great. my hope for what the first week of launch looks like is we put it out there and we have everyone sign up immediately, right? All the node operators in the system will, of course, have to create nodes, like separate nodes. And when I say nodes, I mean a node contract, like Rocket Pool requires you to do. You have to, create a node. So ideally, every one of our node operators, every one of the, 200 or whatever that we have right now, hopefully 300 or 400 by launch, will, immediately create a node. And maybe ideally it would be low gas price environment. And then, we would also ideally get a bunch of XRETH and XRPL deposits in order to sort of get the system over the initial hump. There's a little bit of a bootstrapping period where, you need to have a certain amount of TVL to get everybody a validator, as well as keep some, portion aside so that you're not like, if you only have 100 ETH in the system, then, somebody pulling out like 50% of that would be a lot. And it would require us to pull out, we would have to exit a validator or something like that. Otherwise the XRETH would sort of like depeg pretty dramatically. So the quicker we can get over that initial hump, the more TVL that's deposited in there, relatively early, then the safer the system is moving forward, because we don't have to deal with all these. I mean, no one's ever going to be losing money, right? Like the ether is always there to back up everything, but it just makes for a better user experience, basically, if we don't have to be managing it quite as heavily. So the hope is that everybody can, obviously as much participation as possible. That'd be great. Ideally thousands of ether deposited, as well as lots and hundreds of node operators signing up, things like that. So, I think we have, I wouldn't say like outlandish hopes, but we have quite a few folks that are very excited about the launch, and that includes both node operators and depositors. So I'm pretty excited about the prospects when it does go live. My wildest hope and dream would be day one we drain the rETH deposit pool. And I'm not going to say that that's out of the question. I think it's plausible, but I think most people with that level of ether are probably going to be waiting a few days to make sure we're relatively safe. But
Yeah,
it could happen.
For any of the larger depositors, I mean, frankly, for anyone, right? You want to be scaling into this on day one versus aping in, obviously.
We would not encourage anyone to ape in.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's maybe a good segue to our next two questions from the community. Danielo again asks a question about, if this does scale pretty aggressively, right? There could be a validator. Many of us are home stakers with commercially or just consumer based hardware like Nooks and so forth. Have you given any thoughts or limits about the number of validators that you would recommend on a piece of hardware?
So we haven't done, specific stress testing with Constellation yet, although it really shouldn't be all that different than Rocket Pool. So, I'm going to give you a bit of a cheeky answer, but ask Marceau. He is very, in touch with the limits of individual nodes and what they can handle. Thomas is another good resource. These, broadly speaking, it should be roughly similar. So if we get to the point where every node operator is running as many validators as Marceau or Thomas have on their nodes, then that would be an extreme success scenario. That would be, a very, very large multiplication of Rocket Pool's TVL, even above ours. So I don't really expect there to be any major problems with people running some large number of validators. If we got to 200 validators per person or something like that, that'd be pretty large level of success. And I think at that point we would probably,
I would be uncomfortable with that level.
Yeah.
I would really want to see horizontal scaling, right?
Right.
And adding more operators. So we as the sort of administrators, like we want to be seeing consistent horizontal scaling over time, versus, even if you have like 500 operators, 200 validators per person would be an obscene amount of assets. And I would much rather double the operator cohort versus jump to that kind of concentration.
Yeah, our next question comes from Stake 603, who asked a question about have you thought about any incentives to help facilitate client diversity, either on the execution or the consensus layer clients?
So this is a question I ask every operator who signs up. It's would you be willing to consider rebalancing if we began to see excessive concentration, either within the node operator cohort specifically, or across Ethereum more generally? And in general, people have been saying yes, and we already do have fantastic operator diversity, client diversity within both Rocket Pool and the Nodeset group. It's maybe 30% geth, for example, which is quite strong. The problem is, if we start to tie incentives directly to client choices, then that's immediately gameable. We have no real way of truly verifying what you're running. Maybe in the future there's some kind of ZK, verifiable compute that we can have run, but at this point in time, it's actually impossible to do that. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mike.
No, that's correct. Unfortunately, that's the case. Now, I don't expect that to be the case forever, and we will definitely be paying attention to. I mean, there's been some really cool work done on light clients recently, and I do think that it is possible within the next few years we might have a. I mean, technically, it is. I can, tell you technically how to do it today. You could theoretically run a client pair, an entire Ethereum node inside of a ZK virtual machine. Like that is something that you could theoretically do. Now you would have to have an enormously beefy machine, and you probably would not be able to publish proofs fast enough, or even create proofs fast enough. But I guess you could do it after.
128 CPUs, right?
Yeah. I mean, but that's not to say that it's impossible to do it, right? Like eventually it could potentially happen, and I mean, the hope is that, especially with light client implementations, we get to like a ZK-ifiable Ethereum nodes pretty quickly. I think that there's been a lot of really great work done in this space over the last few years, and it's kind of accelerating. So I do think it's plausible that Ethereum's client I mean, I should back up and say for a second that like we are like Nodeset is not going to solve Ethereum's client diversity problems. Now, I think that generally speaking, because we have such a wide and diverse node operator set, just like Rocket Pool, I think that we can be a positive force in the ecosystem, especially because we're doing this egalitarian distribution. But I don't necessarily think that this is something that Nodeset itself is going to solve, right? Like we will use whatever solutions come out from the core client devs, but yeah, we'll have to see where the ecosystem goes. It's I tell people all the time, I tell my family when they ask me what I do for a living, I tell them I work in early internet infrastructure, and they're like, "What do you mean? The internet's not that early?" And I say, "Yes, it is. It's very early."
I like that. That's a great description. Jasper's back in the chat with another question about rainbow staking. That's the concept of maybe separating some of the duties, ones that could be done on more light client versus some of the more intensive duties and separation. Have you guys had any thoughts about that, or have you had a chance to kind of analyze some of the concepts around rainbow staking?
Briefly, I'm not as up to date with it as I would like to be. Especially these days, I'm so much more focused on getting what we're working on to be in a complete state. But I do try to keep up with this stuff in general. There are a number of different proposals that have made their way around. I don't know which one's the most popular these days, or even whether they're plausible. But one thing I think it's good to back up and just say, generally speaking, Nodeset wants to provide whatever Nodeset can provide, right? And that means, our sort of tagline, right, is connecting opportunity to node operators, or node operators to opportunity, right? And so if that means there's an opportunity for a node operator to provide some kind of service, then we will do that. We'll at least put it on our list to evaluate, right? There's a lot of those out there, and we want to make sure that we provide the highest value opportunities to people first. But I think that given our core competency is in staking, generally. That's something that we are very excited about, is, you know, keeping up with the staking ecosystem and making sure that we can provide the most value we can. So yes, I mean, ultimately, one of the really interesting things about a permissioned node set is that you can, you know, striate people by their capabilities, right? So you can, one of the things that we're looking at right now is, you know, for the future, having Hyperdrive, that's the name of our client, do some analysis of someone's local system and say, you know, this is the level of capabilities that they have, right? And you know, if they can somehow prove that, and they really only need to prove it once. I mean, technically, maybe you could spoof it or something. I mean, they're problems to work out, right? And it's not a foolproof solution, but we're looking at ways of, you know, somehow striating people into different groups and saying, okay, you have, you know, a giant DevOps, you know, a giant setup in your garage that would make any enterprise DevOps person, you know, weep with joy. Okay, well, you can be in this segment that where, you know, you're doing these L2 sequencing, or you're doing ZK proving, or kind of these other like heavy tasks, right? And if you fail at those tasks because you spoofed your hardware, then, you know, we'll just remove you from that, and you won't get paid anymore. But you know, so there's different ways that we can sort of classify people over time. Now, none of this is on the near term horizon. You know, we're not actively developing this, but we are actively thinking about it. And this goes into, you know, it speaks to rainbow staking. It also speaks to L2 sequencing, ZK proving, you know,
The entire AVS ecosystem, right?
right?
In Denver, you talk to someone who's building a sort of machine learning kind of protocol, and the person's desperate for GPUs. And so you're going, well, the entire Rocket Pool community, the vast majority of whom probably have GPUs that could be put to work in some way, shape, or form. So there's just tons of opportunity, right, in the future when it comes to all these various compute tasks. And you know, the cool thing is we want to provide different opportunities to someone so that they can sort of level up over time, right? Maybe you start off with validation, but you are really passionate about all of this, and you want to start adding more hardware at home. And you know, 2 months later, 6 months later, a year later, you're now running a full server rack, doing a bunch more tasks. So there's a lot of exciting stuff coming, and you know, we want to connect you guys to those opportunities.
Okay. Well, let me ask just a few more questions on this as we start to kind of bring this to a close a little bit. I guess one of the things that was alluded to a little bit here is the timelines, and I know it's still in very much active development. But can you just expand upon when you think Constellation might launch? You had mentioned a prerequisite of Houston, but just walk us through what you think the timeline might be.
Yeah, at a very high level. So the place that we're at right now, I'll back up and say that what we currently have is a mostly complete MVP. The code is, well, I should put it this way. I come from the game industry, so I'll use game industry terms. We're sort of in alpha right now, which means that the feature set that we have is not quite complete. It is sort of MVP complete in that everything that needs to be there is there. But there's a lot of bugs that are probably left to be found. I mean, in our case, we have a lot of testing to do. So we're working towards, you know, being alpha complete, basically, which would be a total completion of all features. We have all the features in the code base right now, but we're not really confident that they're in their final form. There's a couple things in particular surrounding pre-signed exit messages that I want to make sure that are, you know, more optional and, you know, not as like required by the protocol, just in case something were to happen, for example. I mean, there's a few little like kind of security details like that, right? That we need to just like kind of iron out and make sure that we're going to put something out that's like rock solid, and is not, you know, dependent on any kind of third party server or whatever, right? So that's sort of the state that we're in right now. We're mostly writing tests. We're mostly finished with the MVP, or we are completely finished with the MVP, but there's a few
and MVP that's minimally viable product.
Yes, yeah, minimum viable product. So, yeah, the idea if Houston were to have launched, you know, like I don't know, a month or two ago, then we would probably just release the MVP, right? But since it's coming out in May, we have, you know, a little bit of a grace period where we can kind of like refine the product a little bit more. So I'm going to move. You know, we're the idea is that ideally we go at the end of alpha, you know, which is coming in the next, you know, month or so. we'll be moving from that to audits. So for us, we do rely on Houston. There's a particular function inside of Houston that is required for us to make this entire thing non-custodial. And so I will, if you recall, I mentioned before that we had a pretty heavy hitter ask us, why can't you just release, without this feature? And we were like, well, we appreciate that you're so excited about this protocol, but it does need to be non-custodial. You can't just put it out there just because you want to deposit a bunch into it. So we do need to have Houston out, but when Houston is on mainnet, so May 6th, we're all excited for that. And when that happens, we will pretty much immediately begin audits. Hopefully we'll be ready, or not, and we may be in the middle of some random thing, but we'll be very shortly after that doing audits. So we're already scheduling those right now. We don't have them settled yet, just in case, but that's what's sort of coming up next for us. And then after audits, we'll be doing three audits, just like Rocket Pool does. We'll have 3 different independent auditing firms. We are after auditing, we're going to move straight into a testnet deployment. So from there, we'll have a bug bounty. Everybody will be able to go onto Holeshki, use Hyperdrive, make a node. You probably won't need to be whitelisted for that, or you may be able to add yourself to the whitelist or something like that, just so that we can get as many people testing that as possible. On mainnet, you will have to be a Nodeset node operator in order to participate in Constellation as a node operator. But the goal with the testing period, just like it is for Rocket Pool, is to make sure that it's 100% solid and that there's no hidden little issues anywhere. And there'll be a bug bounty associated with that to incentivize people reporting anything that they might find. We do also have a pretty good, as you imagine, we talk to hundreds and hundreds of people all across the industry. So we have a great network of folks that are very excited about what we're building, and a great many of those folks are very technically oriented. So I'm really excited to get the eyes of all these technically experienced folks on what we're building, and I honestly, I think that's going to be even more valuable than any of the audits. So it's kind of funny because ideally we pay nothing for the bug bounty, but because by that time the code is rock solid or whatever. But I am fairly confident in the fact that if we get past the bug bounty and there are no bugs found, or even if there are a couple bugs found, but at the end of the day, we get through it, I think it's going to be very, very solid at that point. So from there, we'll have it on testnet for long enough for us to feel confident in what we're doing, and then we'll launch. So currently, we're targeting July, just because that's how long we think that the process might take for audits as well as testnet. However, don't hold us to it. You never know what might happen, and we would much rather have a secure and safe protocol. I tell this to the Rocket Pool team all the time. I love that they're willing to prioritize safety over speed, just because it means a product is viable at that point. You really only get one chance to launch. If you launch and then you get exploited, then it's all over. So it needs to be right the first time. So we're looking forward to a potential launch in the middle of the year. If something happens and we have to delay it slightly, hopefully it won't be very much longer than that. For the most part, we're getting very close. It's kind of ironic because I used to work in the game industry, and I would see people, like the state of the code that we had, like, I don't know, 6 months ago, people would have been like, yeah, launch it. We'll figure it out after launch. But you can't do that here. You have to be much more careful. I always hated that. I always felt like it was, bad practice from a technical perspective to put something out that you weren't confident in. So that's what we're gonna do.
Let me switch gears with maybe one last big question here, which is I did have a chance to kind of read the analysis that you and Nick had put out regarding some of the tokenomic proposals in the Rocket Pool community here, and I wondered if you might take a little bit of time here to share any thoughts you have about those tokenomic proposals.
Yeah, at a high level, this is this is maybe kind of a slightly annoying answer, but I highly recommend that everybody actually read the report. I know it's long. I know that you don't want to read 27 pages. You know, if you only are going to read one portion of it, read part two. Part two is sort of the risk analysis of the proposals that have been written so far. Um, at a high level, you know, again, I read it. Don't rely on secondhand interpretation. Just go read it yourself. But I'll summarize it, you know, here. There are a number of potentially large risks that we identified with the existing tokenomics proposals as they're currently written, but we also did find some ways that could be, you know, some ways to mitigate that risk. So we suggest those as well in there. And, you know, we want to contribute to the conversation positively. This is not about tearing anything down. It's supposed to just be like, hey, you know, from a risk perspective, you know, everyone should go into this process, you know, with open eyes and understand, you know, the direction that we're walking. And, you know, if we decide to walk that path anyway, I think it's important that everybody be, you know, aware of some of the risks that are involved with that. So, you know, as just as an example, the DAI collateral base years ago became really centralized, very, very, very heavily, with, you know, stable coins like USDC making up, you know, nearly the entirety of it. And this was mostly because MakerDAO didn't sort of stand up and say, this is something that we don't want to do. They decided that growth was more important than decentralization. You know, MakerDAO's kind of struggled since then. Today, DAI only has like 30% of its maximum TVL that it used to have, and it never really had a very high TVL compared to some of the other competitors. So I think that it's kind of risky to walk that path. You know, you can say I want growth above anything, but you just have to be willing to accept that you may get some things out of that you're not expecting. And we lay out a lot of that out in the report. And, you know, like I said, I would encourage everybody to just read it and, you know, kind of be informed. You know, if it were up to us, I think, you know, frankly, I think that what we're building with Constellation plus Nodeset is a significantly more interesting product than Lido CSM ever will be. They're hamstrung by some forces, some political forces, right? That Rocket Bowl doesn't have to be hamstrung by. You can kind of build something totally unique and different with a combination of a permissionless system and a civil protected permissioned system in combination with one another. I really believe that both of those together can be, you know, really, really powerful in a way that, you know, all the things that other people are looking at the market right now and kind of, you know, oh, what about Lido CSM? What about, you know, EtherFi or this or that or whatever? Like, you know, those things are sort of like, you know, they can be a bit of a flash in the pan. You know, if you do a permissionless protocol correctly, then you should have a lot of different, you know, ecosystem partners building on top of you. And, you know, you just have to be really careful though, because some of the tokenomics proposals that have put out there definitely do impact builders like us and make it harder for us to do our job. So, you know, I just want to caution everybody to think carefully about these kinds of things as you're going through them. There are a lot of tokenomics proposals that are not controversial at all. Like, I mean, obviously, megapools are incredible. Everybody loves megapools. I think that for the most part, as long as they're safe, and as long as we can, you know, prove that they're safe enough for our ETH, LEB4s are a really fantastic thing to do. You know, and you might even be able to have some of the same proposals that have been put out so far, just limiting them a little bit, right? And not letting them just, you know, run wild. Otherwise, you know, you could have some risky things appear. And again, I mean, this is sort of our perspective as builders. You know, these are the kinds of things that we're seeing, and, you know, on a technical level, we just want to have everybody be aware of it. Now, if people decide to move ahead with it anyway because they decide that that's, you know, the direction that they want to move in, then, you know, so be it, right? Like that's sort of what the community's right to do that. So, but what we didn't want to do was just have people going into that blind, right? So, you know, the report is there just so everybody can say like, okay, if we're going to walk down this path, you know, at least maybe we can do it in a little bit more conscious way. Maybe we can do it in a somewhat safer way, you know, or maybe we decide this path is not right for us, and there's another path that maybe makes more sense. So, That's kind of at the high level. I'll summarize by saying just I recommend being very careful. I'll quote Patricio again. When we talked to him a little bit about this, he said, "Be very careful." There, like I said, there are changes that we identified that can limit these risks. So I just really recommend reading the report. It's it's long, so sorry, but that's going to be the best source.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been a lot of long reports lately here in the staking community by multiple folks. So I certainly understand. But as we kind of bring our section here of today's call with Nodeset done, Nick and Wander, are there any things that you feel are important for the Rocket Pool community to know that we haven't had a chance to touch on in today's call?
I'll let Nick take this one. He knows a lot of stuff to say.
Yeah, I think there's I think we're sort of like at an interesting point in time where the community has an opportunity to make some sort of long-term strategic choices about where the protocol moves. And I sort of think of it like in the perspective of like a core product, a single product versus platform kind of model. And how do we handle the numerous competitive pressures in the ecosystem? Obviously, there's the gorilla in the room around the Lido CSM. And then, of course, there is this massive new restaking ecosystem. You can, of course, argue till the end of time how viable that ecosystem is, and what will the organic revenues being thrown off of it in the near term, et cetera. What will the native yields be, et cetera. But regardless, it exists, right? In these restaking protocols are attracting vast amounts of TVL. So you're sort of sitting in this world with a lot of stuff happening, and it's moving quickly. And Rocket Pool's taken the right path in my mind when it comes to focusing on security. It just means that results in a bit slower rate of development sometimes. And when you're in this kind of place, what is the right way to move forward? And from our perspective, and one of the reasons why we love Rocket Pool so much is that it does provide sort of that palette upon which you can build exciting things, which in turn, reward the community, rewards the protocol, and it rewards the builder simultaneously.
Yeah, another example of this, it's not just us. I mean, All Nodes was like first to build on Rocket Pool, and
absolutely.
It's another good example of like people driving value to the ecosystem. Simply because Rocket Pool has like security and safety as its like number one goal.
Absolutely. Yeah. And obviously we're all in Ethereum, right? And that's exactly Ethereum's strategy. It's not about telling the world what the optimal scaling solution is. It's about providing a fundamental base layer that allows innovators to come in, invest vast amounts of capital and intellectual capital to build and iterate and try different things to eventually come to a optimal design or set of designs. So that's sort of like how we just something we want to posit to the community. Think about how we can try and incentivize as many minds to come to this ecosystem as possible to parallelize innovation and development, right? Without the current system as it is, Nodeset probably would not have existed, and you're sort of getting like an additional team's worth of productivity coming into the ecosystem. And can we expand that to 10 teams worth of productivity and capital investment? So that's sort of what I wanted to touch on real quick. I think that we all want Rocket Pool to succeed. We all want it to be a mainstay in the staking ecosystem for many, many, many years. So we're just really thankful that we have such a great community and so many people who are so invested in this protocol. And let's just think about how we can attract as many people as possible to continue to build on it.
Yeah, perfect. And then one last question for you both is if somebody listening to today's call or on the replay of today's call, what's the best way they can get in touch with you if they want further questions or explore Nodeset more?
Easiest way is our Discord. You can always ping us in the Rocket Pool Discord too. I have a confession to make. In order for productivity, I muted the Rocket Pool Discord, but I haven't muted my pings. So if you need to ping me, you can. I don't know. Nick, I think, is a little bit better about checking in, but the other thing is you can always go to our website too. There's links on our website You can also go to our Discord server. We have a separate Discord server. There's also, we have info@nodeset.io is our email address. It goes directly to me and Nick, and we answer those emails as quickly as we can. So yeah, I mean, we're generally pretty responsive. Sometimes we're out of the office randomly, or folks are busy on other stuff, but we promise we will answer whatever questions you guys have.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure again to spend some time with you both, and thank you very much for doing kind of the deep dive and explanation with the Rocket Pool community on today's call.
Absolutely, thank you so much, Ken. Always great to chat.
Appreciate it.
Excellent, and I see Langers, you're still on the call, so welcome very much.
Hello, just listening in. Great job, guys. That was very good.
Hey, Langers, how's it going?
Yeah, good. Heads down. Good.
Yeah, I can share the same feeling about muting the Discord. It's hard to keep up with that and get work done. But I wonder if maybe, Darren, you could spend a little bit of time with us, giving a couple of updates here. I know we're already long in the call, but I know as folks that are still with us are going to be very interested about a couple of things, mainly Starknet and Houston updates. Which one would you like to take first?
Let's do Starknet. So Starknet is wrapped up from our perspective. So we provided the information to them last week, and we've just been working with them a little bit over the weekend and yesterday on a few things that they've kind of found and that sort of thing. So that's gone really well, and that's all over to them now to kind of plug into their provision system. I don't know when that's going to then be rolled out. I'm not kind of privy to that information. But we've given them all the information that we can do in terms of our node operators, our node operators, the withdrawal addresses, the rETH holders, and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's all kind of with them, and solo stakers and Genesis migrators and that sort of thing. So we've sent all that information over to them, and so they'll kind of plug that into their system and roll that out.
Oh, excellent. And then did you say that they had some questions on the data you provided them, or they just acknowledged the receipt of the data?
They acknowledged receipt of the data, but there was also like a couple of little anomalies, like very, very small sort of anomalies, mainly around like solo staker migrations. So there was actually like a couple of solo staker migrations that failed. So they attempted to migrate, but then end up not migrating over to Rocket Pool and end up having like a withdrawal credential that they owned. So essentially they're not in our bucket of people to distribute to, and they've already claimed tokens via another method. So we were just fixing up those things, and that was basically it. So just kind of cross-checking some of that stuff.
And there's a question in the chat on this topic from Blue AVM that asks, are there any plans by Rocket Pool to maybe kind of share the efforts you've made in providing this data, just to draw attention to that Rocket Pool validators are eligible, and perhaps use it as a little bit of a marketing campaign for Rocket Pool?
We'll definitely do something around. It kind of depends, or we'll see. We'll kind of have a chat with Starknet to see whether there's like a coordinated effort that we could do. We will do our kind of like normal stuff around Discord and socials and that sort of thing, but we'll see if there's kind of like a coordinated effort that we can put together for this going forward. Yeah, so we'll see what we can do around that.
All right, and I certainly invite anyone that has questions to either post them in chat or come up here on stage. But Langers, anything else on Starknet that you feel is important for the community to know, or any requests from help from the community, or is it just a wait and see at this moment?
No, it's pretty much a wait and see. It's kind of over to them now. But yeah, they'll kind of reach out if they need anything. But yeah, no, it's really kind of over to them. I can't give any kind of information yet. I'm not. I don't know if I'm really supposed to. So I need to like talk to them around whether we can make the data available. But to be honest, I think it's not really going to make much difference. I think that they'll put it into their system and then it'll be kind of like available to everybody. Yeah, so I think that's probably best. I'll try to get like a date for them that I can share if I can. I'm not sure whether they're giving that date yet, but I'll try and get that date so that at least I can give you guys some idea about when that will be rolled out.
Yeah, perfect. No, I certainly understand your position of not being able to share and letting them kind of be in charge of the communications. But there were numerous chats in the trading channel after last week's community call that we're just asking for more information on this topic. So I do appreciate anything you can do in that area. Let's maybe go on to the next topic then, which is Houston. So what is the latest? Are we on track for the May 6th? Obviously, my question is going to be about the audits and the release and what's up. You gave a great timeline last time. Can you just give us an update on that? How are you feeling about it?
So no, we're feeling good. We're feeling good about it. The testing's gone really well now. Actually, we've kind of done the last, or pretty much the last of the testing. So we've got I want to kind of do it properly, but the team and I are having like a go no go tomorrow morning about whether we go to testnet either this week or next week. I actually need to, one thing I need to double check is the timing for when we can release stuff to the testnet. So it may actually be next week that we actually get it live or start the process this week. So so we'll have like a go no go tomorrow and start the run sheet, essentially just putting together all the steps that we need to do to release the testnet, because it's kind of our dress rehearsal, and so we're pretty much always our dress rehearsal for releasing to mainnet. So we'll put together a run sheet so that we know exactly all the steps that we're going to go through, and then we can kind of like kick off that process. So that's the idea, to try and kind of start that process tomorrow. But I want to have the go no go tomorrow, just in case there's anything else that we need to wrap up and before we go. I think a lot of the UI stuff is done. We still need to do a little bit of testing on the UI stuff, but we can do that in the meantime. And and then in terms of audits, so yeah, if we can kind of get a good no go, a go essentially, tomorrow, then we're pretty much on target for May 6th. So so that should be fine. In terms of audits, so as I said, I think I mentioned in the last community call, we found a bug. Was it last week or something like that? And so we're just getting the final like fix check on. We're going to try and get the fix check done on that. So audits won't be released this week. They'll definitely be released next week. But we should be able to release those kind of like mid next week, ideally, so that we can kind of get those audit reports out there and switch over, unify to the kind of like Houston code. So that's what we're working on at the moment.
Interesting. Thank you very much for that update. So one question that Phil Cares had written in earlier was asking if there was going to be a Medium article. And Nashua had to remind us all that there actually was a Medium article a long time ago about the contents of Houston. Yeah. Are there any plans to do any marketing or another Medium release or press release as we come close to the May 6th?
Yes, in actual fact, so there'll probably be there will definitely be some sort of other Medium article. We're working on like because there's actually like a few things that we want to make sure that everyone knows. So just like how the new voting system works and all of that sort of thing. So we want to kind of like do a Medium article which gives you like the overview and then points to the documentation for further information. So I think it'll be a bit. I think it'll probably be more of a practical thing, but obviously at the same time, the Medium article itself will be quite high level, kind of like celebrating the release. But it'll be quite practical in terms of, you know, this is what our community needs to kind of like know about these things. These are the awesome things that are kind of being rolled out, and this is how you use them. So it'll probably be more practical rather than the marketing. But you know, it'll play both things.
Okay. Any other topics on Houston? Okay, not hearing any. Let me go to one other question that was asked also by Phil Cares, which was in the last call you'd mentioned that the team was interested or planning to do a number of workshopping efforts regarding the tokenomic changes. Do you have any updates you could share with the community regarding the team's technical evaluation on tokenomic proposals?
Yeah, so we sat down with Val and Samus last week to have a chat about the different proposals. We kind of like provided feedback on some of those proposals, and it was kind of like an education thing to make sure that everyone across the team, you know, knew what they were and, you know, how they worked essentially, and to provide them with an opportunity to ask questions about them. So that was last week. This week there's still quite a lot going on this week, but we're going to have another workshop next week around kind of like different aspects of them and break them down into kind of more what would be. It's essentially just breaking down the scope to figure out what would be needed to be done to deliver those things. More obviously, the idea behind that is also to raise more questions and incorporate that feedback. Yeah, so there's a few things going on. The other thing that we'll be doing is Kane hopefully will be able to spend some more time on megapools, so that we can kind of like kick off the kind of productionization of his prototyping in terms of that. We've still got a little bit to go because there's still some Houston stuff happening, but once we get this stuff on testnet, we should be able to start focusing on those efforts, on the Saturn efforts, much more.
Okay, perfect. And I also invite anybody with questions to either come up here or post them in the chat. I did have one last one for you before we check in with the community here, which is you posted in the protocol channel at the end of last week about RPIP 30, and I had forgotten that RPIP 30 actually has kind of a staggered reduction in the maybe it's the max effective balance, but at least the ability that a node operator can withdraw. And so you'd made mention of that you were planning this week on reducing the withdrawal limit from 150% down to, I believe, 100%. Any updates on that, or when do you expect that to happen?
Yeah. So that's scheduled for today. It is at the moment anyway. I need to make sure that Kane was cool with that this morning. So, yeah, so it's kind of scheduled to be launched today. So I'll do like a follow up protocol announcement once that's actually live.
Okay. Any questions from the community before Langers has to leave us here? I don't think I see any coming in. Darren, anything from your end that we haven't covered in today's kind of shortened touch base with you that you feel is important for the community to know that we haven't had a chance yet to talk about?
Yeah, it's going to be an interesting kind of few months. So I'm kind of looking forward to seeing how things kind of play out. But yeah, no, we're kind of like heads down, getting this stuff out the door. I'm looking forward to having some time to reflect a bit more as we get the release out. But it'd be good to kind of like see how things all progress into the future.
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't know how much rest you're actually gonna get here, right? Because as soon as Houston's out, I can imagine the pressure to start building Saturn 1 or the first version of Saturn, the Megapool version, or however it's going to stage itself, and getting that entire design concept is going to be immense. So I do not envy you in the months ahead here.
It's all been busy though.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you guys are enjoying it. The one thing I do seeing Fornax in here is that we do have an update. Fornax has produced, I guess, 2 back-to-back updates, but the current update out there is version 1.12.1, and I believe it has a number of client enhancements, improvements, and probably one of the more interesting things to the node operators that are listening is many of the clients now are defaulting a setting to if the MEV boost, the proposer, the block builder block is within 10% of what the local block would earn. I think it's reverting to the local block now, and it looked like there was some also improvements, kind of the post and NAB improvements. I don't know, Fornax, if you're on, if you want to comment any additional about that. Maybe not. I put him on the spot, so maybe he can't figure out how to unmute. But if you're a node operator, oh, perfect, you can't use the mic at the moment. But definitely take a look at it and update your node if not already. But if not, I don't see any other questions from the community. So Darren, thank you very much for joining us and staying with us all, and providing us an update about all the important happenings in Rocket Pool.
Anytime. Cheers, guys.